Probably nobody here is old enough to remember the first battle, but there you go. I always swear an oath that Oliver Hazard Perry, because if he hadn't have won, we'd be in Canada with health care right now. So, anyway, so that's the first battle. The second battle for Lake Erie was a little closer to our lifetimes, in the 50s and 60s. You probably may recall, or at least have heard about Lake Erie being considered dead or almost dead. Little cartoon over here that's actually Lake Erie with holding a lily. Cuyahoga River caught fire, on and on and on. And at that time, it was the waste from sewage treatment plants and industries and the phosphates in the detergent. And Lake Erie was in such bad shape, and other environmental concerns around the country, that the first Earth Day happened in 1970, and the condition of Lake Erie was one of the driving factors in doing that. And after enough people got upset and started hollering at Congress, they passed the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act, and that was something that in those days really worked to clean up the rivers and lakes. Now we're in the third battle for Lake Erie, and whereas before the problem was factories, sewage treatment plants, and phosphates and detergent, the problem now is agriculture. And we believe primarily the factory farms with the many confined and barbarically treated animals. That picture on the top left, there's a couple of, they're not tiles anymore, they're plastic like everything else, but they run 3 or 4 feet underground and they drain all the fields around here, being the former Great Black Swamp. They have to get the water off them, and so they put the manure on, it goes down into those tiles. And that poor, sorry-looking catfish on the bottom is actually my front yard from a few years ago. So you probably know the value, as we generally state value, of Lake Erie. That's my front yard on a better day. 3 mallard hens, Mom's Day Out, I call that one. Clean water is a right, and the seagull is up there for a purpose, because we don't want to forget that we're talking about more than drinking water for human beings. We're talking about water that's used by many species, and we're the only one that screws it up, and we're the one that's got the responsibility to take care of it. So it belongs to everybody, and nobody or no corporation has the right to impair it. But what happens is, I'm sure you're aware, with these factory farms, in quotes, they use Lake Erie as a free toilet, hence our banner. And what they're doing is a long tradition in industry, steel industry, chemical industry, you name it. They try to reduce their costs by passing costs of doing business onto the public. And in this case, what they do is dump their waste in Lake Erie. And so we're paying millions more every year for chemicals to keep the water safe to drink. Toledo water ratepayers put $500 million into upgrading the water treatment plant. 50 million of that was for an ozone unit, which I'll talk about later. And the craziest thing to come down the pike in a long time, we're next to the 11th largest lake in the world, and the powers that be are planning a 1 billion-gallon reservoir for $100 million to hold 20 days of water in case we have to shut the water off again. Now, at some point, you might ask, wouldn't it be cheaper to keep the crap out of the water? And here's what happens is factory farms use Lake Erie as a free toilet. And that's a rather iconic picture that circulated widely back in 2014. And 9 years after that, some people are still trying to find the source of the problem. That fellow doesn't see anything, but perhaps looking in a different location would be useful. And we point to the over 800 factory farms in western Lake Erie watershed. Now, let me explain a little bit here. You can see where it says our drinking water there on the end of Lake Erie. You probably know that's the Ohio border. Ohio, Michigan goes over to Indiana, and then you got Michigan, and the vertical is Indiana. That is the Maumee River watershed. It's not the entire western Lake Erie watershed, because that would include the Portage and Sandusky. Sandusky River goes through Fremont, Portage goes through here, and the western Lake Erie watershed also includes a little bit more southeast Michigan, not quite up to Monroe. So this is about 6,500 square miles. The entire western Lake Erie watershed is about 8,000 square miles. But this is a picture of the Maumee watershed, and what it shows is those green dots, 2005, were how many factory farms there were, and they increased by the red dots in the right one by 2018, and they've grown since then. Our group has done some research, and the best we can tell is that there's 800 and some of these things. They create a tremendous amount of waste, literally billions of gallons of feces and urine and antibiotic-resistant bacteria and viruses and you name it. But if you just look at the phosphorus that's generated by those animals and is in their manure, that phosphorus equals to what's in the sewage from all the people in Ohio, Indiana, Chicago, and Atlanta. And it gets dumped with no treatment on the fields that drain into Lake Erie. So, a brief look inside the factory farms. Doug, you almost wound up working in a chicken joint. On the left there, those are the layers in the cages. And companies make a big deal about, oh, we have cage-free now. Well, that's what the cage-free ones look like. They don't have enough room to turn around. And if you go on our website, on the homepage and scroll down, there's a little icon that says, let's go to the movies. And you can click on that, and it'll show you a list of movies. And one of them is called Cockfight. It's about a guy who used to be in this industry and got out of it. And what he shows you in there is in the cage-free area there, he shows you what it looks like after they lay down plenty of manure and the ammonia is so bad it just burns their feathers off. And down in the bottom left is what happens with male chicks on day one. Obviously they don't lay eggs. So they get macerated, which is a polite way of saying ground to death, or thrown in garbage cans with plastic bags and tied off and suffocated. Hundreds of millions, literally, hundreds of millions of male chicks born in operations that are geared to raising eggs. That's what happens to them, because they're not considered economically viable to raise them and have them be used for meat. Because they raise the hens, they breed the hens in such a way that they, lay eggs like there's no tomorrow. And the broilers, which are the ones that don't lay, are raised differently than the layers. The broilers are raised so they grow so fast, and particularly their breasts, that their legs splinter, they fall over, they can't walk. I mean, it's quite an industry. So here's a little bit more about the inside. The top left, those are called gestation crates. And the pig right below that is called a farrowing crate. A farrowing, you can see the piglets. So a farrowing crate is what a sow moves into when she's ready to give birth. And up until that time, they stayed in these gestation crates for their entire life. And they get re-impregnated as fast as possible to raise as many pigs as possible. And those things have no room to turn around, and it's just hellacious. They wind up going crazy and exhibiting all kind of wild behavior as a result. And these are called open pens, which is supposed to be the pig improvement, relative to cage-free for chickens. And here's inside of a cow factory farm, milking time and feeding time. And I don't go into it here, but man, if you take a look at any of those movies that you can get to from our website, and you can see what happens to the animals here. This is a shot of veal calves. Now, if just like chickens, if you're born a male calf, you're no good for milking. And they're also not good for much at all when it comes to raising them for hamburgers. So they either shoot them in the back of the head right after they're born, or they move them to a veal operation, or they get sent off to the belt and shoe factory. But they don't get allowed to grow into a, and this is what they live in and eat, and this is where this one guy's trying to lay down. So it's a hell of an industry. So here's the 800 plus factory farms in the Western Lake Erie watershed. Again, the picture is the Maumee watershed. But in the Maumee watershed, the animals increased from 9 to 25 million, while at the same time, the phosphorus from commercial fertilizers, what farmers put on their beans and corn, went down because it's expensive, and they've found a number of ways of using less and still getting good yields. So the phosphorus used has gone down. The manure, which is a waste product and they can't get rid of enough of it, has gone through the roof. So here's the commercial fertilizer sales from 75 to 2016. And you can see that farmers are finding a way to use less of it over time. So our point is, if the farmers are using less commercial fertilizer and there's more and more and more animals, maybe there's a correlation between that and what's happening to the lake. So here's Lake Erie, and the perfect storm for our poor lake. It's the shallowest and warmest Great Lake. It's got the highest content of subsurface drains, and it's got these annual toxic algal blooms. So this is a map, as you can see over here, of subsurface drainage. All these little pixels here are counties. And here's the key over here. So you can tell the darker the color gets, the more drain tiles per hectare there are. And as you can see, here's our watershed. Nowhere else in the Great Lakes has as high a concentration of drainage tiles that we do. Now, the reason I drew this line here is to show that, yeah, this area's got looks like about an equivalent concentration of drainage tiles, but everything from here down is the Mississippi watershed. From here up is the Great Lakes. And as you can see, the Maumee River is the biggest river going into the Great Lakes, and we've got the biggest watershed, which made sense. But in this case, green is not good. We get overabundance of nutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, and the one that appears to be the biggest bugaboo is dissolved reactive phosphorus, and that's different from total phosphorus. That's the type of phosphorus that feeds the microcystis bacteria, which we call toxic algae, when actually it's bacteria, and it creates a toxin. When those bacteria die, their cells release that toxin. 88% of excess nutrients in the western Lake Erie Basin come from agriculture, and the nearest we can tell, over half of that comes via the subsurface drainage. And taking a look at microcystin, here's its relative toxicity. So you probably know something about those toxins on the left, and the doses on the right is the dosage required to kill 50% of lab rats if they're exposed to that dose. So dioxin, you need 1/1,000,000th of a milligram per kilogram per day. Microcystin, you need 3/1,000,000ths of a milligram. And then chlorine, you need 1/10 of a milligram. So pretty bad stuff. So treating the drinking water makes it drinkable, and we've put $500 million in upgrading the water plant. I mentioned 50 million of that is to put in an ozone unit, and ozone helps knock down the pollutants, but it also, one of the main reasons it's included is because when you use chlorine to decontaminate organic pollutants like poop, it forms a carcinogen called trihalomethanes. And to get that out of the water, one of the few ways you do that is with ozone. So that's, again, at some point it might be cheaper to keep the crap out of the water. So let's follow the manure. Here is an aerial view of one dairy operation in Williams County, out near Bryant, 3,900 cows. Not the biggest dairy operation in the watershed, but one of the bigger ones. And it generates more waste every year than Perrysburg, Sylvania, Maumee, Defiance, and Fremont combined. And I like to say that if the mayors of those towns were to tell the EPA that we don't feel like treating our sewage anymore and we're just gonna dump it on the land, they wouldn't get too far with that, although Maumee got
Yeah, I was gonna say, Maumee told them that.
Maumee, yeah, well, no, they didn't tell them that. They
Right.
just shut up and
Yeah.
did it. But they're gonna pay. But at any rate, the manure lagoons is where each one of those is probably 1 million gallons. So the scale of these operations is incredible. And it's liquid because that's how you can raise 3,900 cows in a place like this. You can't, it's too expensive. It's not that you can't, it's too expensive to hire kids like me when I was a kid in Berkey with the pitchfork to go there and clean out the stalls. You just hose it all down and have it go into those lagoons and everything's liquid. The same thing with pig manure. So it goes from those lagoons to a tanker or some other conveyance to get out to a field, and there's manure going on there. And one of the things to keep in mind is not only the different pollutants in it, but the fact that to truck that stuff away from the factory farm location is expensive. So the operators do not want to take it any further than they have to, which means the closer you are to that facility, the more manure that field's going to get. And then you got some farmers that don't want that on their field, and so you got to get rid of it where you can. And these companies come in, I've been out in the country and seen these tankers that haul these big tanks like that. They come in from Nebraska and Iowa, and that's what those guys do all summer, is go around to factory farms and haul waste out. So it goes down through the soil to the underground drainage or the surface runoff and into the streams that feed Lake Erie. And that is not a root beer spill into good old Lake Erie. And I'd love to point out that when we first started doing this a few years ago, invariably somebody with a Chamber of Commerce mentality would say, "Oh, you're giving us a bad name, you're showing up." Okay, this is from NOAA, and the European Space Agency has got similar ones, and maybe we should deal with the problem and not worry about the cosmetics.
So basically, they spread that manure on the fields, expecting the ground to filter it,
Yeah,
but the black swamp's been tiled, so it like goes right down the drain.
yeah.
Yeah.
Let me tell you how fast some of the information that we have, in fact, this was one of the things I presented to the Ohio EPA today. You would think they would know this, but who knows? There's a guy who used to work for the Soil and Conservation Service. His name is Frank Gibbs. He's since retired. But he was in Michigan, I don't know, Hillsdale or Lenawee County somewhere. And back in 2006, we got the article from, I forget the name of the paper, but it was like a regional newspaper. And he took purple dye and dumped a bunch of it in a manure lagoon. And then they took that manure, put it in a spreader, and went out over a tiled field. The tile was dry. You know, they didn't start with tile that already had water in it. The tile was dry. And they took a pass over the field. And in the article, Frank says, you know, I'm talking with the other guys there and say, how long do you think it'll take it to get out to the ditch? Well, should we go to lunch and come back? Well, 15 minutes after they put that on the ground, it was going out to tiles. So
Yeah, it's good for growing things, but not for pollution.
Yeah, yeah. And this is, again, what I said to the EPA, that if there's one watershed in the entire Great Lakes area that should not have factory farms and liquid manure, it's ours. So, what we're doing doesn't work. Politicians like to say they're doing something for the lake and blah, blah, blah. And so we're putting literally hundreds of millions of dollars, of tax dollars, into stuff like this. Buffer strips, grass waterways, cover crops, and no-till. Farmers get paid for doing this. And this stuff doesn't work, and I'll show you that in a minute. These practices were developed years ago primarily to reduce sediment. They found out it also reduces nitrates and total phosphorus, which is particulate, but it does not reduce dissolved phosphorus, and that's the bugaboo for algal blooms. In fact, the studies that we've read and tried to convince the EPA of this today, there are a number of studies done by Kansas State, Purdue, and the USDA and other places that show that when you use no-till, for example, that doubles the amount of dissolved phosphorus that winds up running off the field or into the drain tiles. So this stuff does not work, but it is what the Ohio EPA has put in their total maximum daily loads, which is the thing that the US EPA and Ohio EPA got sued. Our group was one of the plaintiffs, and after 5 years and learning this stuff, we said, this whole thing's bullshit. You know, and if we don't want to be part of something that says, oh, we won the suit, and the EPA has to do these total maximum daily loads, which is supposed to be, under the Clean Water Act, is supposed to be what is going to clean up the lake, when in fact, this is all they're going to say they got to do. And we learned that these things don't do bupkis. So we withdrew as plaintiffs about 1.5 years ago. But the hearing today was on the draft TMDL document that the Ohio EPA put together. So we went there one more time. 31 people from our group went to Bowling Green today. And we said, you know, this stuff ain't working, but that's all you got in your draft document. And you better start looking at the manure that's coming from these operations. So what I'm saying is these things don't work. And here's the proof. These two graphs represent findings from the National Center for Water Quality Research in Tiffin and Heidelberg. The one on the left is particulate phosphorus. That little round thing is filtered paper that shows what particulate phosphorus looks like. Particulate phosphorus includes the dissolved reactive phosphorus. And again, that's the one that is fueling the microcystis or algal blooms. So you can see that both of those graphs start in 1970. And if you follow them over, the particulate phosphorus slowly goes down. You know, it's kind of staying down. These blue lines are the goals. That's what the scientists say we got to get down to in order to prevent the lake from going toxic every summer. So, so this one is the total phosphorus, and you can see it's going down, and you can see that the management practices out on the fields are probably having some effect because the total phosphorus is going down. However, here's where factory farms came in, mid-90s. And the dissolved phosphorus from 1970 is going down, 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 got the phosphorus out of the detergents, cleaned up the sewage treatment plants. Dissolved phosphorus is down at a decent level. Factory farms come in right here, and bingo. So it appears to me that those methods are not doing the job. Yeah.
What happened in that time frame that caused the big boom for the factory farms to? Was it an economic thing? Was there a change in legislation that allowed them to happen? Or did somebody
all
just
the
say,
above.
oh wow, we can do this, and
All the
it
above.
just sort of caught on?
Yeah. There was a company called Vreebehoff that set up operations here, and their big thing was to go to the Netherlands and sell the idea to dairy farmers over there that they could come here, land was cheap as opposed to the Netherlands, plenty of water, lax regulation, and they set up this operation. It was just like a turnkey thing. You give us whatever the amount of money was, we'll waltz you right into this operation and you just take off and do your thing. They set up half a dozen of the first ones of these. There was one or two in Wood County and another one up in like Lenawee County. And most of them went out of business. Some of them were bought by other companies. But that was the mid-90s, and that was the beginning of these things coming in like gangbusters. And you know, the regulation stinks. They get away with just about anything. There's subsidies like crazy for this, and you know, land is relatively cheap around here. So that's.
Well, do you think that corn-based ethanol might be a factor also?
Yep.
I think that came in about the time, I think Bush Senior rolled around to get the farm vote.
Yep.
They're probably more primarily nitrogen and phosphorus, but it's all contributing.
It's industrial agriculture, you know?
Right.
There's a great movie called Food, Inc. If you haven't seen it, I recommend it. You can get that through our website too. And it talks about, I mean, you can approach this from a number of angles. The person that put that movie together looked at the fast food industry. And he said, here is the industrialization of our food supply. And here's what happens when you do that. When you're cranking out Egg McMuffins and et cetera, or Chick-fil-A's, or you know, fill in the blank, you need an industrial operation behind you. And that means the corn and the soybeans, and then ethanol comes along, and people like Marcy Kaptur that keep voting massive subsidies for that, even though it's been proven to be an energy drain. Yeah, I mean, that all ties into the same thing. So we have a food policy and an agricultural policy that has been designed by the companies that make the most money off it. Well, now there's a surprise. How many industries has that happened in? Transportation, education, healthcare, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, but thanks. That's a good point.
Do you think
Yeah,
that
go ahead.
there's, oh, I'm sorry, Jerry.
I've read somewhere that some of these factory farms, the cattle are fed so much antibiotics that it makes their manure not usable for fertilizer.
I don't know about that. They feed them enough antibiotics that 80% of the antibiotics used in this country go to livestock. And when you've got them jacked up with antibiotics in the factory farms, what happens is you get milk and meat that contains a lot of antibiotics, and their manure has got antibiotic-resistant bacteria in it, and their milk and their meat has got antibiotics in it, which a fair number of people smarter than me talk about that's part of the reason we're having a hard time having antibiotics work properly. I've never heard that they can't use the manure because it still has the nitrogen and phosphorus in it, but I'm not an expert on that part.
Do you think that some of the apathy on the part of the public come to do things, to get behind resolutions that would change this situation? Do you think that some of that comes from the fact that government agencies like the USDA have made a lot of regulations saying your meat is safe, your milk is safe? We check this, we make the industry meet certain standards so people feel complacent in that safety. And so maybe they're like, hey, as long as I can eat the meat and it's safe, the rest is not an issue.
As long as I can drink the water, the lake's okay.
Right.
There's
There's some
good.
complacency that comes from hearing so much about how safe everything is because regulations exist.
It's interesting. That's an interesting question. I'm not sure.
That's kind of where my first thought is, okay, so I had a hamburger yesterday. My meat is safe, so why is the water not safe? Doesn't one need the other? So so I'm really happy to learn about a lot of how this works. And I know the lake is not healthy, and I know that there's a lot that we need to do. But I'm wondering if that's kind of where the general thought process of the public is.
If you know where that is, sister, please let us know.
Because it seems to be small groups that are trying to get behind this,
Yeah.
and I know that I think there should be more traction from the general public to get the government on board and the governmental agencies on board. So I'm wondering if there's a way to downplay the safety aspects of everything that's great to drum up.
Well, what we're trying to do is get the facts out there. This is like anything. It's like, nuclear power. It's like, fill in the blank. The reason it gets promoted the way it does is because that's where the money is. The regulatory agencies are captive to the industries they're supposed to regulate, the politicians. It costs unbelievable amounts of money to run for office. The Supreme Court has decided that money is the same thing as speech, and you can't have enough of it, and all the way down the line. And, people, Lord knows what, I don't know. They got kids, they go shopping, they watch football. I mean, you tell me why more people aren't concerned about things. Part of it is because these kinds of efforts are always way uphill. And that's why 30 of us went out to a brewery after the EPA hearing today, so we could have a good time and have some kind of social time to enjoy ourselves and enjoy each other, because doing this stuff all the time gets pretty tiring.
Oh,
It's, you're looking at human nature, man. I don't know.
Why isn't the legislature more concerned about the damage to the tourism industry from the health of the lake? People don't want to go swimming in that algae or boating in it, and that's a big industry in northern Ohio.
Well, they say they are. Politicians, every one of them will tell you how much they love the lake and how much they appreciate the tourism. I know some of the charter boat operations have, been a little involved with this. They're not gonna make any waves. I asked 2 different charter boat captains and 3 different yacht club leaders if they would become plaintiffs in that lawsuit that we got involved in years ago. Every one of them said, oh, Bill, we love the lake, blah, 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 but when it came time to put their name on the line, no, we don't want to upset anybody.
Yeah, every time they shut down Maumee Bay State Park because of E. coli, that doesn't make for a very good copy for the PR
No,
for the state.
That
and
is-
it happens like every other day now.
that is the second most polluted beach in the country.
Mm-hmm.
I believe it.
First one is down at, what is it, South Padre Island or something down there. Yeah. And they say, well, it's the seagulls. Well, yeah, sure. Or it's the deer, or it's
No,
those
no.
with the diapers running around.
And I was also going to mention too that they've had a real terrible algal bloom problem with Lake St. Mary's.
Oh, yeah.
And they just were, what's going on? We don't know why this is happening.
It just
And it's the
destroyed-
same thing. They have a lot of factory farms in that area.
It just destroyed that lake, because that lake is really shallow. I mean,
Mhm.
you probably know, that was dug to provide water for the canal system.
Right.
So it was hand dug, so they, that's not a deep lake. And it's just been destroyed. So, to answer your question, there's not enough hell being raised by the people who are being affected. I guess that's the bottom line. It's easier for the politicians to keep the status quo going and keep the Farm Bureau checks coming in on campaign time. And, it's a corrupt system. Oh, there's this project. Okay, so anyway, we're done with that one. Here's our recommendations. Recognize that nature has rights, hence the Lake Erie Bill of Rights from a few years ago. Water and air are not property. But unfortunately, that's what the law says they are these days, so you do with property whatever you can get away with because it doesn't have any inherent rights. It's a commodity. And we also say there's no fixing this industry. You can put in all the buffer strips you want, and somebody's always coming up with another great idea of how to take care of the phosphorus and turn it into Lord knows what. I heard a few of them today. But you're not going to fix this industry by futzing around the edges a little bit. This is outrageous operation that is barbaric to the animals and deadly to the environment. And this is something that, particularly in our watershed, has no business. And now, sometimes we get to this point and somebody will say, well, where are we going to get our meat and food? And just similar to the anti-nuclear power, we're all freeze to death in the dark. You're all going to starve to death in the dark. I have a very simple answer to that, and I don't rely on bumper sticker answers to very many things, but I do on this one, and that is everybody in this room is old enough to remember prior to 1995. And I'm willing to bet $100 not one of us went to Kroger's and had to wait in line for the next shipment of hamburgers or milk or eggs or pork chops, and that was before any of these things were in our watershed. So you can't tell me we need them. No, that's the model that agriculture has evolved into because of public policy and subsidies like crazy. But it's not because we can't get by without it, because we did. And this, as so many things, is a political fight. The guy who was a former deputy chief of the Ohio EPA, worked for 19 years before that job as an Ohio Farm Bureau lobbyist. This H2 Ohio, these management practices, is good money after bad, but it makes politicians feel good and they can say they're doing something. These factory farms receive billions in public support, and that's not, equaled when it comes to smaller sustainable operations. And the big political question is, who's going to pay to clean up Lake Erie? Is it going to be the farmers, the row crop farmers that have reduced their commercial fertilizer usage significantly? Is it going to be us water and sewer ratepayers who have already paid billions to improve the water and sewage treatment plants? Or is it going to be the people who are causing the problem? And you know what kind of political fight is going on. And all you got to do is pay a little attention to Larry Householder's House Bill 6 scandal to see how decisions are made and what kind of nonsense is going on right now behind the scenes dealing with this problem. But as eternal optimists will observe, we did it before. You know, and Lake Erie was just about dead, and it was brought back. So it can be done again through democracy and organizing and so forth. So please let people know about our group, about this presentation. You can get involved, at least fill out a postcard before you leave. We got other things, you know, we had 30 people show up at the EPA hearing. We'd love to put you on the list and include you in the next one. Think about what's on the end of your fork. Think about driving through McDonald's or Chick-fil-A. You know, think about where that stuff comes from. And we get out on the streets and do all sorts of things. The bottom picture over there, the cow in the middle there is my wife. And we get out regularly. We went to the Old West End Festival. And they said, okay, well, we'll get these costumes, but somebody said, why are you taking it out on the animals? They're unwitting suspects in this. And I said, well, okay, we'll put shackles on them. So, and we went along, and you hear these little kids say, Mom, why? Well, that was the first year. In subsequent years, we had a little thing made up of PVC pipe painted black that looked like a jail section. And they were walking behind that, and these kids said, Mommy, why are those animals in jail? And we had somebody behind them with a shovel and a big plastic swimming pool that said Lake Erie on it, and this person's shoveling into the lake. So, and we try to have fun. So, there's our friend Margaret Mead. And here's a number of, this is another one of the things that we do. I don't know if you remember the billboards we had up about a year and a half ago. Airplane banners flying around. You don't get enough characters on a banner to say Lake Erie is not a toilet factory farm. So we had to say Lake Erie does not equal toilet. But hopefully the message got across. There's the Great Lakes watershed. And I showed you before that map that came in close to the Great Lakes over here. Here's us. And just to put things in perspective a little bit. Oh, there's an aerial view of factory farms in Texas. That's the waste pit on the right. Okay, and this is all available on our website. These are the studies that we looked at in order to come to the conclusion that the H2 Ohio things ain't working. And there's one from Purdue, and there's one from Kansas State. Look at this. Results from the study found cover crop treatment increased dissolved reactive phosphorus in both cropping years. Now, on and on, one after another, we found these research reports. I guess we don't need these guys. Okay, so there we go. I made a mistake and came without a sign-up sheet, but if you have a piece of paper that we could use, if you want to get on our mailing list, just give us your name and email address, and we'll put you on there. let you know about what's coming up. We meet once a month at Grace Lutheran Church on Monroe Street. And we go out and do all kinds of things like you were seeing here, so.
So just last night on the news, they were talking about the issue in Wood County with the dairy farms and the
Yeah.
roads.
Yeah.
So one of the dairy farms down there is looking to get approval from the state to increase the number of cows that they have. Does the state have any limitations? Are there a lot of hoops that the dairy farmers have to jump through to get this approval? Or is it a matter of, we've got the money, we've got the cows, we've got the space? And they just sort of
Well,
let it go?
The factory farm operators will cry poor mouth till the cows come home. They'll tell you how difficult it is, but, I mean, there's over 800 of them in our watershed, so something tells me, and the Ohio Department of Agriculture licenses them, not the EPA. Now, I don't know how much difference it would make, but the lobby, the Farm Bureau lobbyists in Ohio made sure that the permitting authority was transferred from the Ohio EPA to the Ohio Department of Agriculture. Now, in Michigan, it's the Department of Environmental Quality or the state EPA that licenses them. And they do have to, there is more regulation than we've got here. But, it's crazy. I mean, the whole industry is just, I don't know, it's nonsensical. I mean, there are dairy farmers, I don't know if there's any around here, but there are, you read it in the trade publications, there are dairy farmers that are dumping milk again because the price they get for it is so low. And yet they keep expanding these things. So something is haywire. If they're subsidizing operations that produce something that isn't needed, something is really off. And if it was a lot of smaller livestock farmers, sustainable operations, and it was tough to synchronize the subsidy program with what they needed, and they wound up getting some, that's one thing. But this is like the cotton farmers out in Texas getting hundreds of millions of dollars in subsidies to not grow cotton. It's because, your folks have got the money and they have full-time lobbyists, and that's how the laws get written.
Just railroad full steam ahead.
Yeah.
So I was also wondering, so ban the factory farms, and so then what do we do? How do you get these farmers to, do we give them options to spread out? Will that help mitigate the situation, or just shut them down? Or,
Well, you'd have to.
the idea of saying you're going out of business to 800 farmers, if we had a corporation that was gonna shut down and take 800 jobs, people would be up in arms about that. So shutting down 800 plus factory farms would surely get rid of more jobs than that. So how do what's the realistic mitigation of that?
You would do it over time. First of all, you'd stop permitting new ones.
Okay.
And that'd be the first step.
Yeah, don't give this dairy farmer in Wood County the
Yeah,
opportunity to put another.
yeah. So, nobody in state government has the nerve to say we ought to have a moratorium. They're not even to that point. So anyway, quit licensing new ones, and you have, pick a number, 10 years, something. You have a period in which they're phased out. They got to get out of that business. But there will be subsidy money, just like there's hundreds of millions of dollars of subsidy money for this stuff. Take that subsidy money and put it into assisting smaller, real farmers. I don't consider the people that run these operations farmers. They're industrialists.
Sure.
You know?
Mega corporations.
Yeah, yeah. And a lot of them, at least in our part of the world here, they're not, and I don't know what the numbers are, so all I can give you is a guess. But in places like North Carolina, where Smithfield, you know, went wild and had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pig CAFOs, and Iowa, same thing. A lot, if not most of those were corporate owned. Around here, the model seems to be, and there's probably some of them around here, but the model seems to be more that the Smith family has been in soybeans and corn for a long time, and they decided to get into this. Or they've had a dairy operation and they decided to, you know, instead of 50 cows, get 5,000 cows. So they're all corporations because they're all incorporated, but my guess is that not as many of them here are tied into the super.
Yeah, I was thinking Kalmbach.
Well, there's one right there.
County.
Yeah. They go along the classic big corporation model. They're vertically integrated from the feed up to the chickens, pigs, and everything.
On your website, is there a list of like responsible dairy farmers, responsible cattle farmers, that kind of thing?
No.
That we could support?
No, I can tell you.
Like, is it talks or?
You can go to the farmers. You can go to the farmers market. You can find places around that have responsibly raised, meat products and stuff. We should do that. I, a couple of times have asked people if they would put a list together, and yeah, they're going to do it. They just never did.
Okay.
So, it's one of the things that needs to be done yet. We're glad for anybody to do that. So.
Are organizations like PETA ever involved in issues like this?
Well, as you know, they're really gangbusters on animal welfare.
Right.
But so many of those groups like PETA or Mercy for Animals or the Humane Society, they don't have local chapters. And so, how do you find them to go do a program? Every once in a while, we run into somebody at something like this that happens to be a member, and we say, yeah, can we get involved with you guys and vice versa? But we've not had a lot of luck at that.
Yeah, I think there was one of those animal rights group was they filmed inside. I think it was one of the chicken farms around here somewhere, and it was a big stink because they ended up the company was going to file charges against them for impersonating a worker or something like that, something weird. Because they didn't tell them that they were investigating them
Yeah.
and secretly filming things. It's like, well, that's the whole point.
Yeah. Again, go to our website, go to the homepage, scroll down a little bit and see where it says, let's all go to the movies, and just click on that. And I tell you, if you eat meat, you should watch at least one of those kinds of movies because they're gruesome as hell. But, if you eat meat, that's what you do. My wife and I eat eggs and we eat cheese, and we don't buy cheese from small farmers. Too often we get it from Kroger's. But we buy all of our eggs at the farmer's market from a couple that comes in from Baldwin County all the way into the Toledo Farmers Market. And we get their eggs, and we get one of their chickens every month. And we get some wild-caught seafood every now and then. It's tough to start getting into a conversation and just talk about what people eat or what they should eat or anything else. But that's why we say just think about what's at the end of your fork and how it got there. That's something everybody should be doing.
Like, have you tried any of the fake meats, the Beyond Meat, the artificial meats that you get in any grocery store? I have them now.
Yeah.
And that's a growing market. I'm amazed. I'm seeing that they're now growing meat in a dish, basically. It's really
It's amazing.
amazing that's what's taken off there.
Yeah. Yeah.
My,
I've tried, to answer your question, yeah, I've tried, I've had 2 or 3 of those Beyond Meats or Impossible Burgers, but
Yeah.
I gotta watch my sodium, and those things are usually full of sodium. And, you know, I'm just not crazy about eating stuff that I have no idea how in the hell it got
I
there.
know.
my thought about that is, I think for some people that's a great option. I certainly am not going to, say one way or the other whether somebody should or should not. But how does it get there?
Yeah.
Because it doesn't go straight from the farm to your table. It goes through a manufacturing process.
Oh, yeah.
And those manufacturing processes are not necessarily environmentally friendly either. So just,
I mean,
just
just
another
for-
thought for people that are thinking that they're doing a world of good by not eating meat.
Yeah. Yeah.
That you have to consider, I mean, if you're gonna go down one road,
Mhm.
think about the other roads that you're not going
Yeah.
down.
I mean, the best thing for the planet is eat plant-based diet. And
Sure.
I don't think that includes Impossible Burgers and Beyond Meat.
Yeah, I don't think things come from plants, no.
You know, and there's, so, thank you very much for your time and attention and
Thank you very much
the
for
invitation.
joining us today. Appreciate it. And I put a